I'm Susan Raybuck, and I am a retired school teacher. I retired in 2011 after 31 years of teaching. Some of it was here in Wimberley, and the last 10, 11 years were in Comal ISD. But I've had a real interest in media and media policy and such, so I had actually started working on a graduate degree in radio quite a long time ago, very slowly while I taught, and then when I retired I was able to pursue it more in depth. But anyway, I'm almost done. I'll finish in May if I pass 5 comprehensive exams in April, which I think I'll be able to do. But my husband and I raised our 2 sons here. We moved here in 1986. My younger son is youth pastor at the Methodist Church here in town. And Dr. Bob, I know many of you already know, but he comes to us, he's a very good English teacher and film teacher and a number of other things. He's helped start the Texas Prison Museum when he lived over in the Huntsville area, East Texas. Was it Huntsville or Houston you were living in at the time?
Huntsville.
Huntsville, yeah. And just has a really fascinating background, doing some film teaching this year, but has a strong background in radio. He was very instrumental in trying to get radio here in the past. Our secretary, Narissa Oden, is here. She's filming, so she can't turn very easily, but she graduated from the University of Texas with a degree in radio, television, and film. She's worked for a top 40 radio station as a DJ. She's done video editing and worked in post-production, audio post-production with commercials and film. Been out in Hollywood, back here in Texas for parts of her career. Salwa Khan moved here from the DC area where she has, she's a broadcast journalist, worked for CNN and ABC. She still is very involved in media production. She also teaches documentary video at the University of Texas. Texas State University. I've reverted to where I got my undergraduate, but we're both at Texas State University, but she is actually teaches there. And then Duann Redis is a member of our board. She'll be here shortly. She went to the wastewater meeting, and many of you know her already. She is the owner of Maui Wowie, among other things, and has been very active. All of these people have been very active in a volunteer capacity throughout the community, involved with the Lions Club. Duann has been on the Board of Arts from the Heart and several other things. And then Linnea Bailey. Linnea, if you'll raise your hand. Linnea is a CPA. She is our treasurer for organization, and she is also been very involved in the Lions. She also served on the Wood Creek City Council for a term, and so we're really grateful to her for her time, energy, and talent. But she's got a very strong background with the Lions, and she and Dr. Bob helped organize all of the volunteers for Lions Club market days, and that's a huge job for quite a considerable amount of time. 2 of our board members cannot make it this evening. There's a slim chance one of them will come in towards the end, and that's Mac McCullough, and you know him from the City Council. But he has a long-time interest in radio. He has been an amateur radio operator for a long time. He's a master electrician. He owns Wimberley Cafe and some other small businesses, and also very involved in the community. The person who can't be here at all because her work hours changed is Susie Howd. She has been a DJ for 2 different radio stations. Duane, I forgot to mention, has been a DJ in her past as well. So Susie now works for AT&T in their 911 call center. They do a lot of problem solving for emergency situations all over the country. So when Hurricane Sandy came through and communications were down in a lot of places, she was on call almost all the time while she and their team tried to figure out how to get communications through to the West Coast in that emergency situation. So we've got a really diverse group of board members and some great people. And let's see, Narissa.
Oh, well, according to our bylaws, we need to have a majority of our board members present, and we have 8 board members total, and we've got 5 present, so we do have a quorum here tonight to conduct our business legally.
Very good. And so I thought I would give you an overview of our efforts on radio, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of history. Separate from that, radio stations started in the early 1900s, and people quickly saw that it had some great commercial opportunities. So people like William Paley, who later became head of CBS, was very involved in forming radio stations. But it got so popular that new ones were starting up everywhere, and the signals were interfering with the signals of other radio stations. And so the well-established ones had already started figuring out that they could sell advertising on their stations, and with these other stations coming up and the signal interfering, they decided they couldn't stand that. It was costing them customers, so they lobbied Congress to ask Congress to regulate radio. And in 1927, the first Radio Act passed, and it has evolved over the years, but the Federal Communications Commission has evolved out of that act. And in the 80s and 90s, a lot of these local radio stations started merging and consolidating. And they decided to cut costs, and as it cut costs, they did less and less local programming, and more of it was centralized and national. And computers and automation came in, and they needed fewer people at the radio stations. And now many of the commercial radio stations you might listen to have nobody there to interrupt their computerized programming if there's a national or local emergency to broadcast about. So it has some real-life consequences for the communities that have become so dominated by these commercial, consolidated media corporations. Austin has about 40 stations. Only about 4 have any local news. And it's not that big a percentage of what they give. So the lack of having radio to broadcast an emergency has affected our Central Texas area in the past. When we had the last big round of major flooding, flash floods in New Braunfels and in San Antonio, the Clear Channel's own stations, or some of those automated ones, they broadcast no warnings. And so there were people who died, they drowned, where had their listening audience gotten to hear warnings, perhaps they would have avoided those areas or known to get out of the area where the floods were coming. So it does have real life consequences. So having no way to do that local interest broadcasting led advocates to start forming groups and organizing. And they've lobbied Congress for 10 years, and several members of Congress have taken a strong interest in it and have made several attempts to pass a Radio Act to allow communities to have low-power FM radio stations. It finally cleared Congress, both houses, in 2010, and at the very tail end, it was signed into law. And so then that next process was the FCC had to develop the rules under which we would be able to apply and who could apply. And those were debated, and there's always a public hearing process, and so those were only finalized and released in November. So they set an October target date to allow for organizations to apply for radio licenses. And previously, we've had 2 or 3 attempts to get a radio station in Wimberley. I know the CERT team, the Community Emergency Response Team, worked very hard, met with our then Congressman Lamar Smith, and he was not able to help them because there was no spectrum available. And so all of the efforts were kind of stymied for that reason. But because of the Local Community Radio Act, Wimberley Valley Radio is convinced that this is the right time to apply, and we think it's a rare opportunity that will go away as those licenses are granted, and that it will be a very long time before there's another opportunity for local communities to apply for radio. So since 9/11, all communities in the United States have been really working hard to solve some of the issues for public safety. They were before, but it gave it extra urgency and incentive to do planning, and radio has been something that's been very desired here in the Wimberley area. In 2011, what really got my attention were the fires in Central Texas. Mm-hmm. Bastrop was covered well by the Austin media after a slow start because of the holiday weekend and the automation stuff. A lot of them gave their employees the weekend off, the holiday off, and so they were on automation, and so they didn't have very many news crews covering anything those first couple of days, and Bastrop had trouble getting the word out because of that. But eventually those stations did kick in, and there were some that had crews on the scene from the beginning. I think KUT was one of those very early ones. But what we found here is we had fires in the Wimberley area. On Fisher Straw Road, we'd had the Freedman Ranch area fire that same weekend that could have reignited. Luckily, we have a very talented group of and very knowledgeable group of emergency and volunteer firefighters, and they put that Freedman Ranch fire out very, very thoroughly, knowing that the forecast was for the winds to get very high later in the weekend from the hurricane that was churning in the Gulf. So it was a red flag warning day on that Sunday of Labor Day weekend. So I started trying to figure out how I could get the information, got online. I'm pretty media savvy, and I was trying to find where was any current news, and I could not find it. Then I started worrying about my friends who, I have disabled friends who might have had trouble getting out, and I started realizing that for lack of any fast way to broadcast emergency information, if a big fire started here, we would have trouble. So that was a big motivation for me to start looking around and trying to figure out if there were like-minded people in the community. And I had heard and been very supportive of the KAPS efforts and come to their fundraiser before the Local Community Radio Act passed, when they kind of hit that brick wall again. So we need radio for all kinds of things. But in terms of emergencies, there's flash floods in this area, fires could happen again, power outages, road closures. And of course that recent shooting that was, had all kinds of things going on. Well, I live down Kearney Lane, just past the middle school, nearly catty-cornered across from the Red Ranch Road. And so, trying to get news and accurate information was very difficult that day. Let me tell you about Wimberley Valley Radio Corporation. We found like-minded people, and we formed as a Texas nonprofit with the state of Texas in April. We've been working, so far we have completed our bylaws. We were fortunate to have a good attorney help us, Lisa Bennett with Baker Botts in Austin. We've commissioned a preliminary broadcast engineering study that looks very promising for our being able to find spectrum available here in our area. There was some doubt being this close to a pretty saturated media market in Austin, but they believe it can be done here. And then Wimberley Valley Radio joined the National Federation of Community Broadcasters. I went to their conference last summer and made some really useful connections there. We are working on finishing our 501c3 application, which will help us get substantial discounts for some of the licensing we're going to need to do for copyrighted material. And also, of course, it will help us receive donations. And we've set up an audio streaming task force to work on the internet portion of our plan, because anything that has to go through the federal government is a slow process. But there is no reason we can't start serving the community through use of the internet and internet radio far before then. The federal requirements that they set, the rules that they established, require applicants to be a nonprofit and set up a non-commercial station with an educational mission. And they have rules that at least 75% of board members need to be from the local community within, I don't remember the radius, but 10 or 20 mile radius. And they strongly give preference to groups that can find a location, a local station location that can be manned at least 20 hours per week. And so we are going to need community help to find a place like that where we can set up our equipment and man it and allow people to come in and start producing their shows. We would like to be within the vicinity of the schools, because we hope to offer students the opportunity to get some hands-on learning with radio. So that is our goal. And we want to start, one of the other requirements of the FCC is that we create our own content and that we have at least 8 hours a day minimum of locally produced content. So they really were serious about local community radio. The maximum amount of power our transmitter can have is just 100 watts, not the strongest signal. That has a radius in ideal terrain of about 7 miles, not a diameter of 7 miles, 3.5 mile radius. But they also said that low power FM stations can own up to 2 translators, which would retransmit our signal and could extend the reach of our signal. Our station will be staffed by all volunteers. We don't have the ability to pay, and we know this is a great community for volunteerism. And our plan is to broadcast 24/7 so that we are there if there are emergencies. That doesn't mean we won't have some of our content on automation, like through the night hours. We're not going to try to have somebody maintain it, but we have numbers where the emergency people can get hold of somebody and get us, or maybe even set up a system where they can access the radio station and break in and interrupt and get that emergency information out if it's that kind of an emergency. One of the things we really want to do is bring public meetings to the public. like broadcasting the city council meetings and the commissioner's court meeting. Wimberley doesn't really understand quite often what is happening at the commissioner's court because the summaries that we see in print don't really share the context or the flavor of what the back and forth arguments, the pros and cons are. So to be good citizens, we need some of that information. We want to have local news and events and a community calendar so that we know what's going on and can participate more in our own community. Wimberley has lots and lots of creative people, artists and musicians and actors. Some of them are already doing internet shows, and we would love for them to maybe continue their shows maybe through our station or maybe create some new content for our station. We want to provide opportunities for teachers to use the radio station to broadcast some of the work of students. For instance, Dr. Bob would love to have some of his students write poetry and be able to have their poetry given voice on the radio. And we want to provide those students and also interested adults, because I didn't get interested in radio until, just the last 2 or 3 years in a hands-on way. And so if they miss the opportunity back in their youth, maybe they would like to learn about it as adults. So we hope to involve people and have trainings for people so that they can participate. We've got lots of veterans in Wimberley. Perhaps they would like to have their event broadcast. Maybe they want to share some of their war stories with us. I think that we would be enriched by hearing from a lot of different people who have important stories to share and interesting stories to share. It's a way for those little niche groups in our community to get value out and share what they are all about too. We want to do live music and events. Wimberley football, if we can get it. We would love to have somebody broadcast that live. And we would like to do other sports. And we want to give, basically, bottom line, we want to give people a lot of reasons to listen. Maybe they're not musical. Maybe they would much rather have news and information. But we also want to give an outlet for all the creative, talented musicians, for example, in our community, and the next generation of musicians who need to get started and get some microphone and radio experience. It is a process to start a radio station. Wimberley Valley Radio has been at it for approximately a year. And broadcasting, once we apply in October, it's still maybe 3 years off. And who knows with the federal government. But we're going to keep our fingers crossed that it's only about that. And it could be better. We could have a best case scenario. We want your help in building up an archive of content unique to Wimberley and help us start preparing to start live streaming on the internet as well, but also have pre-recorded stuff. Our target date for the internet portion of a radio station is the end of July. There are some things that have to happen before we can meet that target, but that is what we estimate we can realistically hope to do by then. We will apply for the LPFM license in October, but we want to start building content and a listening schedule that will attract a variety of listeners. And like I said, it's a real process. What the station ends up being is really going to be shaped by the community. What we become and what we broadcast really is up to the community, and that's one reason we wanted to start at this point, to reach out and start involving people to give us input, help us with this creative process, And what we end up with in the end will be beyond what the 8 of us on the original board have been able to imagine and dream up so far. So we want you to sign up tonight. We want your friends to sign up on our website. And we would love for you to volunteer. We need you to volunteer. We want you to get our emails. For one thing, we are going to need to develop the procedures for submissions and guidelines and that sort of thing. So we want those to be able to be sent out easily to you for live broadcasts as well as for pre-recorded stuff. And we need your help getting the word out to a wider community that this has started, and we're inviting people to get involved with it through your Facebook community or your group of friends, church. Help us with outreach. And then there are other ways to help, including send us ideas for shows, for talent in the community, and it's a big chock full of talent in Wimberley, for people to interview, for topics of shows that would be interesting to you. And apply if you have any interest in creating content. Please apply to be a producer and create a show and content, or you can sponsor shows as a business person. We are not able to take and do commercials, but we will welcome sponsorships when we get to the point of being on the internet and then later on air. We'd love to have you volunteer time. If you're in a position to donate money, we'd love that. If you have recording equipment, there's a number of things we need. Or if you know of space. And as we get to the point of starting to fundraise, we're going to need help with that. Those are some big challenges. We have a programming committee that is going to be starting soon to plan on programming and also to help develop the guidelines under which we take content. And so we would love to have people volunteer to help with that. And one of the really important parts of that committee's work is to generate options for programs and help the board of directors weigh those options and think it through. Meeting our timeline for starting the internet radio station will depend on community support. We would like and we need your financial support. We have expenses coming up for the final broadcast engineering study, a broadcast attorney and their fees. Fees to allow us to stream copyrighted music. We'll have to pay BMI Music for music licensing, ASCAP. We'll also need to have music licensing. Internet broadcasting content has to go through Sound Exchange. That is the agency that reports how much of different groups' copyrighted music has been used to make sure that the fees are paid and get directed to where they need to go. We anticipate that this year, to do that startup process and to apply for the LPFM license, it will take us about $4,000 to $5,000 for those different things. But this is a community that is very, very capable, and we think it can be done here. We will be running everything with volunteer staff. The board of directors is not paid. We're all volunteers. But we need your time, energy, talent, and creativity to make this happen. And Wimberley is a unique, diverse, talented community. We've got retired rocket scientists who live here, you know, all kinds of people, all kinds of talent, artists. All of us on this board really do know that Wimberley can do this. We can pull it off, and we can do that with your help. So that's the formal presentation.